I read an article recently about overcoming your fear. It suggested skydiving. Now, I'm sure I'd find leaping from an aeroplane at 13,000 feet pretty scary, but I'm also likely to have a minor panic attack if my phone rings, or if someone invites me to a party where I'll have to make polite conversation with people I don't know. That's not to say that we can't learn something about coping with fear from people who do leap from aeroplanes or indeed decide for some reason to leap between tall buildings. Metaphorical safety nets are just as important as real ones. We have to be pretty fearless to risk our lives without them. Or do we? Are such risk-taking adrenaline junkies really fearless? Or have they managed to equip themselves with strategies and skills that help them to better cope in anxiety-inducing situations? Even Alex Hanold, probably one of the world's greatest solo free climbers, gets scared now and again. In his ascent of El Capitan, he momentarily lost his nerve and spent several minutes clinging to a ledge before managing to regain his focus and carry on. Insights into the thoughts of the seemingly fearless actually tell us that they aren't really fearless at all. They've simply managed to acquire both practical techniques and positive mindsets, allowing them to keep these fears in check and stop them from becoming a problem, what psychologists call emotion regulation. One important factor in remaining relatively calm in such situations is preparation. What we don't see is the preparation that's gone into Callum Powell's leap between two Hong Kong buildings, or the times Alain Robert, the so-called Spider-Man, visits buildings before actually attempting his climb. So let's see if we can break Powell's jump down.
Pretty good about it. I just need to be sure about the run-up and the takeoff.
Powell knows that he can cover the distance because he's done it before, only much closer to the ground.
The jump measures out at 16, so it's actually not that big. But when I look at it like this, it looks massive, and I think it's just because of that drop down there.
He's also confirmed this during his preparation on the rooftop. Here he practices his run-up, attempting to test each possible variable before his leap. The main difference between this jump and others is simply the height. He knows he can manage the distance, so in a practical sense the height shouldn't make a difference. From a psychological perspective, however, the height poses a major mental challenge. So preparation becomes as much about mindset as it does the physical task of actually leaping. An added problem arises when the building security gets involved, but he trusts his friends to deal with that, leaving him with the mental space to focus on what he needs to do. This preparation reduces fear of failing, or fear of falling, metaphorically in most cases, but literally in Powell's case. For most of us, failure isn't going to kill us, but for Powell it just might. Our fear of failure, therefore, represents a psychological block. But the only way we can guarantee not to fail is to not try in the first place. I'm in no way suggesting that to overcome the fear of failure you should engage in life-threatening activities. There is more than enough in our ordinary lives that make us anxious and fearful. Failure has an obvious relationship with self-esteem and our desire to protect it at all costs. If we don't try, we can't fail, so our self-esteem isn't going to take a bashing. If we try and we succeed, then our self-esteem increases. But if we try and fail, our self-esteem is going to drop. It's often what we do at this point that makes all the difference. But our fear of failure can also lead to us half-stepping. We don't put much effort into a task because we want to safeguard ourselves from disappointment. For climbers and parkour athletes, half-stepping can lead to disaster. For the rest of us, it makes achieving our goals all the more harder. The upside is that if we don't put in the effort, we can simply tell ourselves that we weren't really all that bothered about it in the first place. The problem with this is that we know that we didn't try as well as we could have, and this knowledge can lead to us ruminating over the what-ifs. What if I had tried harder at school? What if I had applied for that job? What if I had asked Alice from my English class out on a date? We can also reduce fear of failure by having a concrete objective in mind, along with a plan of how we intend to meet that objective. We therefore need to look at 4 important aspects of our journey. First of all, we need to look at the possibility of failing. Secondly, the consequences of failing. 3, the importance of reaching a goal. And lastly, number 4, the cost of giving up. For Powell, the possibility of failing was slim, because he's done his preparation and only took the leap when he was sure of success. Preparation had reduced the risk of failing, and indeed falling. But what about the consequences of him failing? If he did leap and fail, the consequences would have been much worse. How important was it that he successfully made the jump, that is, achieved his goal? We can assume that it was important to him, and that he'd planned and prepared adequately. What about the cost of giving up? He could have decided not to leap at all. In this scenario, he might suffer the psychological consequences of giving up. His self-esteem would probably take a hit, and even though his friends would certainly have been supportive, he may feel that he had also let them down. Ultimately, he also had to commit once the decision had been made. Half-stepping here would end in disaster. We know we're afraid of failure when we freeze, procrastinate, and half-step. Do we freeze at the crucial moment? If I apply for a job, but then never send the application, then I'm freezing, because I think I might not get an interview. Even if I am invited for interview, I might pull out at the last minute and try and convince myself I didn't want the job anyway. Take me, for example. I've been wanting to start a YouTube channel for at least a couple of years, but kept making excuse after excuse why I couldn't. This also related to procrastination, another sign that we fear failure, and I've covered this in another video, link above. I tell myself that I didn't have a good enough camera, or that I had a face more suited to podcasts than videos. There was always something that prevented me, and they were never particularly good reasons. In the end, I took the advice of other YouTubers and just made a damn video. The final one is half-stepping, which I've already mentioned. This is also linked to another factor known as self-handicapping or self-sabotage, the placing in my way of artificial obstacles, such as not having a camera to make a video with. These obstacles needn't be physical, and could also include personal characteristics, such as I'm not creative enough, or I'm too old to do this YouTube thing, or intellectual. I'm not intelligent enough to come up with good ideas. These obstacles are imaginary because they can all be overcome. Ultimately, they only exist in our heads. But changing our attitude is difficult, and this is where preparation and planning come into play. Honnold, Robert and Powell would never have achieved what they did without preparation. So why should I assume that I'll succeed at something without first sizing up the task and planning a route from start to finish? Sure, my decisions aren't the kind that could result in physical injury, but they could damage my self-esteem and prevent me from making decisions in the future. It's therefore also about how we bounce back from failure and disappointment, or our levels of resilience. You can find out more about resilience in another one of my videos, or in my book, Becoming Buoyant.